Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. New York Times headline. After days of panic, bank executives can breathe again. That's right. After days of worry, our select few, our bank executives, sigh of relief. Wow, dodged a bullet. And of course they can breathe. Of course they can breathe again. Because they got away with it. Again. Just like the last time. And the last time. And the last time. And the time before that. And oh yeah, the time before that. And yeah, the time before that and before that. And so on. They always seem to get away with it. Always seem to get away with it. So, of course they can breathe freely. Of course they're secure. Secure in the knowledge that they're not going to be out on the street corner with a tin cup selling pencils, like would happen to any one of us. Yeah, of course they're secure in the knowledge of knowing that it's going to be their employees, their customers, and of course, the rest of us, we the taxpayers, who are going to get screwed over. Of course they can breathe again. Of course. And this is just one of those things where you go, will this ever change? And the answer is no, because they understand that their failure means our failure. And as long as they can make this big enough to where enough of us will suffer, we're never going to hold them accountable. It's never going to happen. And I've said for a very long time, every one of those bank criminals who crashed our economy the last time, they should have been perp walked daily. We should have had, and this is the biggest failure of Barack Obama. And again, this is one of these things that I'm hoping Biden learned it from. Now, understand, Biden has taken the position of we're not going to bail them out. We're not going to do these things. We're going to make sure that the system is sound. And I get the thinking behind it, but the messaging still is we've got to hold somebody accountable, because the president did say we're going to hold people accountable, fully accountable were his words. And I asked, what does fully accountable look like? I mean, real accountability, what does that look like? And I'm of the mindset that every one of these executives, especially the ones who hours before announcing that they were going belly up, took bonuses, they should be perp walked. I'll even pay for the shiny bracelets that you slap on their wrists and put behind their back as you walk them out. Every board member who sat on those boards and collected a paycheck to advise these executives on the direction of the bank, they should be part of this. This is one of those moments where you go, the accountability should be wide, swift, and painful, as it is for average, everyday working people. And I know, Rick, you're being cruel. No. This is what happens to working people in this country. There is no safety net for them. If we allow these banks to fail, and this is what they keep telling us, if it fails, the pain is going to be widespread, and, workers are going to lose their jobs, and they're going to lose their homes, and their kids are going to live under a bridge. This stuff never happens to these executives, and this is my problem in this. The pain is never equally felt. So this moral hazard argument that they keep throwing out for, for not feeding children, for not giving, a social safety net that ensures that working people aren't the ones on the butt end of every disaster, never seems to apply to our three-piece suit crowd. Never. And I look at the people in Washington, and again, I know they feel our pain. I know. And I look at Tim Scott, the Republican senator from South Carolina, who says, as a ranking member of the Republican Banking Committee, he says, I'm doing everything in my power to make sure we get answers from regulators on why they were asleep at the wheel. because of course it's the regulators' fault. And, because of course it's their fault that these bankers crashed the economy. And this is great because, my mind goes, the next time there's an accident, maybe we, on the highway, maybe we blame the policeman who was off duty having a barbecue at his house. Maybe we blame him. Or maybe we blame the off-duty policeman because there wasn't enough, overtime money to keep him on the beat. Maybe we find anybody else. Maybe we blame the teller. This is the frustrating part. We're not going to blame Tim Scott because, after all, his party is the party of deregulation, and after all, deregulation is part of the reason we're in this mess. Also, the Republican Party is the party who said, no, we don't need to fund regulators. We need to make government small enough we can drag it in the bathtub and drown it in the bathtub. Remember that? So whether it's, train regulators, whether it's mine regulators, whether it's Wall Street regulators, whether it's bank regulators, we don't have the money. And what they've done systematically, and again, this is a thing that Republicans have done for a long time. They've preached to us about how bad regulations are. Job killers. And at every step of the way, as we point out that, as I said yesterday, who knew that even banks needed brakes? Who knew that we needed a cop on the beat at every bank to make sure that they don't do risky things that get them in trouble? Who knew? Me. All of us. We all know this. But again, we're told these are the smart people. They learned. And it's interesting that the very same people who got us into the last one are kind of the same people who got us into this one. Now, Representative Blaine Luetkemeyer, Republican from Missouri, he's saying, look, we've got to guarantee all bank deposits across the entire country. And my first thought was, we already do for everybody up to $250,000. So for working people, because I don't know anybody who's got, well, I know a couple people, but I don't know many people who've got $250,000 in the bank or in one account or dumb enough to leave it in one account. Everyone is covered. It's those people who said, no, we're going to have larger accounts than that are unregulated and are going to take the risk of having that. That's who he's talking about, the very small percentage. So what he's really saying is, please help my rich friends. The people who have more than $250,000 in uninsured accounts. And here again is another one of these moments where you're going to have to do it. Because if you start a run on these smaller banks, we're going to end up with monopolies, and we're going to end up with more failed banks, and we're going to end up with more chaos. And of course, it's going to end up being a situation where we're going to have to bail out more. Because what's that old saying? You know what rolls downhill? You know the word that I'm talking about. It rolls downhill. Shh. It rolls downhill. We're at the bottom of the hill, and they know this. So when Luetkemeyer, a banker himself, says, no, we need to do this for at least 6 months, a year, because we got to straighten out the industry. We got to clean up the mess again. It infuriates me because I know we have to. But it also tells me that we lost again. Now, again, these are the same people telling us that we can't help those high school kids who took out loans to go to college. We can't help that single mother who bought a home that may have been just a touch above her ability to pay without overtime. We can't help out that family that, one of the parents lost a job or lost overtime or had to take a pay cut. We can't help those folks. No, they need to learn a lesson. But our executives, no. And the weird thing is I was having a conversation today, and I was explaining to someone that, this stuff, we get trained in this kind of stuff. The groundwork is always being laid to train us that, we have to believe a certain way. And that behind every bad idea is a right-wing think tank who's spewing all kinds of garbage, a moneyed interest think tank that's dreaming up bad ideas, churning out one bad idea after another, and kind of laying the groundwork. And the example that I used was how right now we're talking about child labor, because guess what, we're heading for some difficult times. And what we're seeing is kind of these right-wing think tanks who for a number of years have been regenerating and rewriting history every opportunity. And like I said, I use child labor as the example of what's going on right now. States across this country are attacking child labor laws. Arkansas just signed a horrible one. Iowa's got a really bad one. Wisconsin, I think the governor there vetoed one. There have been a number of states that are going after. We're just loosening them, we're upgrading them. They've been talking about this in right-wing think tank circles for 5-6 years already, probably even longer than that. I think 2016, a number of groups were pushing this. This idea that we need to let kids work. There's dignity in work. You may remember those kids of the those dirty factories and mines, but they were productive. They had pride. Granted, they didn't have all their fingers, but they had pride. And again, rewriting history a little bit, rewriting what it took to get those kids out of the mine and what they're doing while not being at work. And I love the fact that over the years I've had these conversations with right-wing folks who've said, no, see, they won't go back to the mines. They'll just go, to Walmart or to, those low-paying jobs. Without remembering that at one point, and I guess I'm getting to be older now, that I remember when those jobs could support a family. Now, granted, we didn't have a gazillionaire class back then. We didn't have a family whose sole wealth was worth more than 60% of the entire nation. But these bad ideas keep being pushed into our head, and when I throw some things out on social media, you see it percolating up. You see their talking points because they've built a right-wing infrastructure, cable news, right-wing talk radio, all of the places where you're learning through osmosis. And you see we're forcing kids to go to government schools. Why not let them go to work and earn a little bit when they can earn while they learn? A 13-year-old on the kill floor at the poultry plant. Why not? They're just little animals anyway. But I got into this conversation of why these things work. Because there's a little bit of truth, there's a little bit of common sense, there's a little bit of us in all of this. Because all of us did, child labor jobs when we were kids. You cut grass, you shoveled snow, you had a paper route, all of those things. And it taught us, the value of a dollar, it taught us the value of hard work, it taught us responsibility, it taught us all these things. That's not why corporate America and the moneyed elite want children back in the workforce. They want cheap labor. Especially now as we're ramping up towards reclaiming some manufacturing from China, especially now as we're seeing a tight labor pool. Where better to get cheap labor than to get those kids back to work? Because we're all saying all they do is sit around and play video games anyway. Get them to work in those kill floors. They got small hands. They can do the real intricate stuff. And they do. They move the needle to where it sounds reasonable. And then we become the frog in the pot. And before you know it, we're right back where we started from. So the question I have is, when do we hold these wealthy elites accountable? And when do we wake up from the game that they've been playing on us for, I guess, forever? We've fallen for this stuff forever. You go back 100 years ago, Jay Gould is attributed to the quote, "I could easily pay half the working class to murder the other half." So nothing new, nothing surprising. Question is, when do we wake up? Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, Donald Trump can still draw a crowd. You look at Davenport, Iowa yesterday. He was in Davenport. Big crowd. And he told the faithful. They were out there with their merchandise. And look, he has been. You got to give him credit. He knows how to fleece the flock, man. They were all decked out in the Trump regalia. But he was saying, look, I'm the only one. I'm the only presidential candidate who can prevent World War III. He will not only will he prevent it, he's going to fix all of those problems over there. And I'm not quite sure how. Didn't give a lot of details other than, I guess just because he's him. Now, in my mind, I go to this place of, well, he's just going to give Putin what he wants. You want Ukraine? Go ahead, take it. Yeah, no worries. I find it interesting that the two top Republican candidates for president are basically backing Russia taking over. Him and DeSantis are both, kind of, no, we got to just kind of stay away from it. And what did DeSantis say it was? It was a territorial dispute. No, not a territorial dispute. It's a little more than that. And also, he said in his speech that he wanted regime change, not in Russia, not in China, but here in the U.S., which is weird because when you hear about regime change, you usually think about overthrowing a country, overthrowing a government. So is this coup 2.0? Was this the dog whistle for the coup folks? Just a thought. Now, what's interesting is the Republican Party seems to be divided on this. You've got the Trumps of the world going, I'll fix it. You've got the DeSantises of the world who still kind of hedging a little bit. You've got some people saying we should pull funding completely. You've got Nikki Haley, who was probably the most, I think, rational on the issue. She said the Russian government is a powerful dictatorship that makes no secrets of its hatred of America. Unlike other anti-American regimes, it is attempting to brutally expand by force into a neighboring pro-American country, and it has also regularly threatened other American allies. She says America is far better off with a Ukrainian victory than a Russian victory, including avoiding a wider war. She said if Russia wins, there is no reason to believe it will stop at Ukraine. This is what I've been saying all along. And if Russia wins, then its closest allies, China and Iran, will become more aggressive. This has been my position from the beginning. And I'm not saying that she's right just because this is what I've been saying. This is one of those moments where you go, one, for the amount of money that we're spending on giving aid to Ukraine, to take out one of your top adversaries and not lose a life. If you would have gone to Ronald Reagan and said for $100 billion we could do away with our problem in Russia, he'd have spent it in a heartbeat. and he wouldn't even have taken it from out of the mouths of poor children. He probably would have gone to rich people and said, hey, we should do this. I look at the reality of the moment we're in and the Republican Party and how scattered they are because they want to blame Biden for what's going on. And this has been moving in this direction for years. Now, you've got Trump who's got this idea that somehow, it's all Biden's fault, and I've had my Trump friends tell me this. It's all Biden's fault, and when Trump gets back in there, it's all going to be fine. And because of Biden, we have pushed Russia into the arms of China. And I'm going, do you not remember a decade ago the BRIC countries coming together and trying to have a currency of their own? Brazil, Russia, India, China. Do you not kind of remember that they were trying to, create their own reserve currency to cut us out and to start their own kind of chaotic situation? Do you not remember that? There's a natural relationship between dictators. And I find it interesting that Trump, fits him or thinks he fits into that because his ideology and his belief structure is right in line with what their thinking is. But I find it incredible that in this country, and I guess it's just because I grew up when I did, that there are people who are siding with Russia in this moment, especially people in our government, and who don't see what reality is. That if Ukraine loses, who's next? And if Russia does attack a NATO country, and we do have to, this is reality. And we have to get involved, and we have to send our young men and women over to defend our ally. That's how nuclear war begins. That's World War III. So by stopping Russia in Ukraine, by letting the Ukrainians fight for their own sovereignty, for their land, and giving them the ability to hold up their own, which I got to tell you, kind of shocking at how badly the Russian military has done. I saw a comedian the other day say, they lost like 10,000 people in the first week, and that was before the Ukrainians even had weapons. They were just throwing stuff out of the kitchen at them. Now you've got Republicans like Mike Pence who's saying we should be increasing support. I actually agree with that as well. We should be giving them as much as they need to defend themselves. I've had some people say we need a no-fly zone. Not with us. Not with our equipment, not with us in it, not with our people. No. This is the Ukrainians defending their country. And we should be supporting that wholeheartedly. Just my thoughts. I want to hear yours. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. Curious your thoughts on this, especially the part where, look, this is one of our biggest adversaries. And in the event that they take themselves down, is this not better for us and the world? Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1915. That was the day British socialist illustrator Walter Crane died. You have probably seen his Art Nouveau style illustrations. Many celebrate International May Day, memorialize the Haymarket Martyrs of Chicago, or commemorate the Paris Commune. He also published a series of illustrations titled Cartoons for the Cause. That series was produced to commemorate the International Socialist Trade Union Congress of 1896. Born in 1845, Crane apprenticed with the Chartist radical William James Linton. He started his career illustrating children's books, nursery rhymes, and fairy tales. He later traveled to Italy with his wife Mary to continue with book illustrations and portraiture. Upon his return to Britain, he became friends with artist William Morris, whose pamphlet, Art and Socialism, deeply impacted him. Crane soon joined the Art Workers Guild and the Arts and Crafts Society. Together, he and Morris joined the Social Democratic Federation. Crane produced illustrations for its journal Justice. From there, he helped to found the Socialist League and illustrated its journal, The Commonwealth. When the League failed to gain popularity, he moved on to the Fabian Society, whose members included George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, and Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Crane produced wildly popular images like the Angel of Freedom and published The Claims of Decorative Art. In it, he asserted art could not flourish in a world where wealth was so unfairly distributed. Only under socialism could use and beauty be united. He continued to publish and became principal of the Royal College of Arts in 1898. A strong critic of the British Empire, Crane supported the Labour Party and produced posters each year to celebrate May Day. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Profiteering is always bad, but there are degrees of profiteers. Level 1 includes your everyday price gougers like banks and airlines. At Level 2, you'll find the more demonic outfits like loan sharks and for-profit college hucksters. Then, top of the heap at Level 3, you'll find Eli Lilly. This $288 billion drug-making colossus is America's primary peddler of insulin, the diabetes drug that some 7 million Americans must constantly take, literally to stay alive. But having both monopoly power over the market and such a huge base of captive customers, Lilly has gleefully jacked up its prices again and again over 3 decades, with it now costing each sufferer as much as $1,000 a month. Finally, under intense political pressure to stop its extreme life-threatening gouging, the giant recently announced it would cut its insulin prices by a whopping 70%. In full-page ads, Lilly hailed its corporate generosity, magnanimously declaring that, quote, everyone deserves affordable options. But, hello, it has intentionally charged unaffordable rip-off prices for 30 years, wallowing in monopoly profits. And hello again, if Lilly says it can keep profiteering on its insulin product despite slashing the price by 70%, that means it has been overcharging patients by 70% all this time. Yet its rich executives want us to thank them? No, thank you. Even with a price cut, they're still charging $66 for a single vial of insulin. Guess what? It costs Lilly less than $7 to produce that vial, and it could be sold profitably for under $9. Meanwhile, Lilly's price cut is voluntary, meaning it can raise the price again at any time. And CEO David Ricks has refused to pledge that he'll keep the medicine affordable.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So an interesting story, I think it was over at Bloomberg, if I'm not mistaken, saying that U.S. apparel companies can't see a future without China. They say that brands are finding new factories outside the country that can produce the quality and quantity they require. And I'm going, they can make it here. We used to make things here. They used to make things here. I mean, I remember as a kid, blue jeans used to be the craze of the globe. American-made blue jeans used to be a thing. They used to be. And then my mind went to this other place. American CEOs are strung out on cheap labor. Maybe this is why Arkansas and Iowa are going after child labor laws. Just kind of a thought. We're just gonna import cheap labor right here at home. Just get those kids back to work. Maybe I'm just throwing it out there. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, can we make jeans? Can we make apparel? Can we make our own clothing here at home? I've asked my good friend Scott Paul to come share some thoughts. He's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, the website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it is good to be with you tonight, as always.
So,
by the way, if you want to put my kids to work, you're more than welcome to. I just want to say we'll make an exception to the child labor rules.
So we're okay putting them on the kill floor there in Iowa?
That's horrific. Yeah, that is actually that's unimaginable that as a nation that that's happening here. Got to stop.
Yeah, we don't want them in sweatshops. We don't want them in buildings where they got suicide nets. At least I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah.
So what do you think? We can't make things here. These companies can't see a future. We're all going to walk around naked if we don't have Chinese children to exploit. Am I getting this right?
Yeah. This is like, I don't even know where to start, because what gets me is like, if you're a clothing designer, right, or if you're somebody, you have to have some imagination, some creativity. There's something that sparked you to make something, and obviously people are responding to it, right? Either because it's great, or it's it's a great look, or it's prestige, or whatever reason. And so the thing that amazes me, Rick, is just the lack of imagination when it comes to sourcing the apparel. Like, where is it going to be made? And so many of these brands have a chance to make a great statement about like where things are made, and so few do. And this is the issue, is that it's become pretty clear that not all, but some manufacturing's moving out of China and needs to find another home. Okay, and some of that will be in the United States, some of that will be in North America, some of that will be elsewhere around the world. But a bunch of these like apparel makers are like, well, we don't know what we're going to do without China. We just cannot imagine finding another source, because we've leaned on, and you described the conditions pretty accurately. A system where we can basically exploit labor, exploit the environment, and with really low tariff access, get the products back in the United States, and we're going to make major margins. And by the way, we're going to kind of hide how we're sourcing stuff, and we're going to shut up about whatever the Chinese Communist Party is doing too, even though it's doing horrific things. And so this is kind of the deal that all of these really creative, imaginative folks have made. And it's frustrating, because I know this because I've talked to these people. If you have the intent to make it in the United States, or to make it sustainably somewhere else in the world, you can do it. And there's lots of great examples of where folks are doing that, and they're doing it profitably. I mean, there's a suit maker, Joseph Abboud, who's made suits in the United States for a long time. He's figured it out. There's a guy named Byron Winthrop who stood up this company, American Giant, and they make hoodies and other stuff like that. And they're start to finish, their entire supply chains in the United States. And they're making good money. They're opening retail stores in places because people are buying their products. And so it's entirely possible to do this if you have the intent, but they're just not asking the right question. And part of this is, I think, the bad advice they're getting, whether it's from MBAs or the management types or the sourcing professionals who are like, oh, you know what, you can just do it in China and not forget about it. Now it's getting harder because of all the geopolitical tensions and what have you. And they're like, oh boy, I don't know what to do.
And you look, you're probably going to have to take a little bit lesser of a margin. I mean, you're not going to make the giant, profits that you made. You're going to make a profit, but not the enormous profits that you made exploiting children.
Yeah, and believe me, they're going to be fine. All right. I mean, the actual labor and material cost that is a brand product, whether it's a sneaker or a piece of fashion, is really, really small. That's a really, really small. I mean, most of that is in the middleman markup, and also advertising, R&D, a whole bunch of stuff like that.
Advertising.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the reason I've never bought a pair of Nike. Never.
Yeah, I mean, it is like it's problematic, but this is kind of the mindset. And so when I do find people who have kind of reshored their supply chains or done it, I've been really interested to talk about it. And fundamentally, they all have one thing in common, and it's not necessarily like patriotism or whatever. It's like they all just had the intent. Said, I wanted to find a way to make it here, and so we made it work. And it's as simple as that. And some people will say, well, we don't have the capacity in the United States right now. And I was like, you know what? That's probably true. We don't. But if there's more demand, it'll scale up. I mean, what do you think happened in China, right? I mean, it's the same kind of deal. It's like, if there's going to be a market for making, apparel in the United States, the supply chain's going to grow just as it is for semiconductors or some of these other products that you're seeing now.
Yeah, it's incredible to me. But I just thought it was interesting that, because people are starting to worry, where are we going to get our cheap stuff? And especially as we're kind of realigning. Because I don't know, the thing in Ukraine has kind of got people a little worried because everyone's looking at Taiwan. Everyone's looking at what is Russia going to do next. The globe is realigning, and the capitalists are worried that someone's going to come for their bank account.
Yeah. Yeah. Just one more thing before we leave this subject. And this is because this example really burns me. This is Apple. All right. Apple, look, great products, unbelievable design. Just it's a brilliant company in so many ways. And it used to make a lot of stuff in the United States like a generation ago. It really did. And it was like it made an example out of that. But it's changed dramatically. And it is rethinking its supply chain in China, but only after it thinks it's going to get kicked out by the Chinese Communist Party, not because it wants to leave. And just a few years ago, Rick, in order to stay in China and do what they did, and you described it, they have the nets to prevent suicide. They can rouse the workers in the middle of the night and get them to make a quick fix. And, it's horrible pay and all of that. They paid hundreds of billions of dollars in basically economic development money to the Chinese Communist Party and various federal and sub-federal governments in China so that it could basically operate its contractors without harassment. And so hundreds of billions of dollars to do this. It's like, you know what? It would cost $5 billion to put a factory in the United States. And the only reason why Apple is even thinking about diversifying its supply chain is because it thinks it now may get kicked out of China one day. Not because of a genocide or human rights abuses or anything else like that, but the fact that, they'd rather leave on their own terms than be kicked out by the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, again, back to Rupert Murdoch. It's not about red or blue. It's about green. It's all about the money. Yeah. Everything is. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Scott Paul. Scott's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Wanted to get some of your thoughts on you sat in front of the Select Committee on China a little over a week ago, I guess it was. Yeah. I'm now starting to see some pushback. I mean, there was a lot of rah-rah, a lot of, hey, this is the right direction. The moneyed folks kind of pushing back a little bit, it appears.
Yeah. I have I shouldn't be surprised. Okay. But, that hearing obviously, was a presentation of the challenges that the Chinese Communist Party presents to our economic and our national security in the United States from a variety of perspectives. There was a dissident there who had been in a forced labor camp in China. There was there's a China expert from the Trump administration, Trump's former national security advisor, myself testifying on what the experience has been like for working people in the United States. And the reaction from the New York Times, from Fareed Zakaria, who has a column in the Washington Post and a show on CNN, and Max Boot, who is an influential foreign policy columnist, and many others, is like, this thing was unfair. It did not present both sides of the story here. And there's a dangerous groupthink that is taking place on Capitol Hill that we got to do something to punish the Chinese Communist Party. And the editorial in the New York Times was, almost parody, because it's like, yeah, they've done this to the Uyghurs, and they've been kind of aggressive to Taiwan, and they don't meet their trade commitments, and they never do this. And Xi is throwing out all norms, and they're not reforming economically. But still, we shouldn't be tough on them. we shouldn't. It's too important of a relationship to change the terms.
Yeah, let's hear what they have to say.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and it's like, wait, the other side hasn't had its case made over the last 20, 25 years. They've had every opportunity to make their case. And one of these guys, Max Booth, the columnist, was like, well, we should hear from the U.S.-China Business Council. These are the people who have operations in China, all the American businesses that decided to open up shop. And what's their perspective is very important. It's like, their perspective is the law right now. It's like, come on, give me a break, guys. So I think that upsetting the apple cart a little bit has created this hysteria And they're trying to amplify everything that we said. It's like, well, they want a Cold War, they want a shooting war, they want something. It's like, no, we don't want any of that. But we do think that having a credible deterrent, changing the terms of the relationship so that it's real rather than abusive, is pretty important to making sure the Chinese leadership knows where we are, rather than basically capitulating as we have over the last few decades. What kind of a signal does that send to anybody? They will walk all over you.
And they have been. This is one of these moments where okay, no, we haven't had a shooting war, but we have been at war with China for years now. And we're the ones who just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Ask those factory workers when I was in Iowa. Ask those factory workers who lost their jobs in Wisconsin and Michigan. Ask those farmers who lost their farms. Start asking people who have lost the millions of manufacturing jobs that have been lost because of our greedy CEOs and Chinese, what the Chinese communist government has sweetened the pot with, and the mercantilist policies that have destroyed the American family in this country. Let's hear from them. Let's hear what they've got to say. I'll listen to them before I listen to what was it again? The American Chinese Business Council?
Yeah, the U.S. China Business Council. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like, I mean, it's astounding to me. It's like, next to me was Tong Yi, who spent years in a forced labor camp in China because she disagreed with the government, was exiled to the United States, was constantly watched, right? And it's like, she talked about what was happening here. And basically, the size of our trade deficit, $380 billion a year, funds the Chinese surveillance state inside China, which, it costs $300 billion a year for the Chinese Communist Party to operate this. And the point is like, okay, what else do we need to happen here to change? And just because these issues are getting raised up now doesn't mean that we're trying to start something. We're trying to stop something. We're trying to change the terms of this relationship. And it was a process that started in the last administration. And look, it was a little bit clunky. And so this is our chance to get it right. But we can't go back to pretending like everything's okay and we can lift the tariffs and things are going to be great and this government's going to change its mind. And instead of building 6 new coal-fired power plants, is suddenly going to become, a green dream. No, China's not going to do that. They've made it very clear. And so we have to follow our policies, be true to our values, and make sure that we're not shedding jobs and our morality in the process here.
Yeah, see, I look at this as an opportunity because, as you pointed out a second ago, the tariffs began under Trump, and good on him for doing it. A lot of this direction, misguided as some of it may have been, and without direction, basically rudderless as it was at least getting us started. And I think Biden has done a very good job of reshoring some manufacturing and moving us in a direction to where we're going to start rebuilding our manufacturing, which we have to do from a national security point, if nothing else. I think we're heading in the right direction. To have this both sidesism, this is kind of infuriating, and this should be something that should be nonpartisan. Red hat, blue hat, never mind. Get on a hard hat. Let's get back to work.
I'm totally with you on that. And it's just like, it's one of those jaw-dropping moments that it's like, wait, elite opinion has been carrying the day here for a couple of decades to our detriment. I mean, you've seen what happened in the heartland. I have. Meanwhile, things haven't improved. In fact, they've worsened for Hong Kong, for Tibet, for the Uyghurs, for Taiwanese. I mean, they feel more threatened than ever. Asia is feeling very uneasy about China's aggression. And, if we don't stand up and say, here's the line, and also make sure that we have the ability as a country to compete and not to depend on key materials from China, then, what's ever going to change? They're going to dig in. It's going to get worse. So Absolutely. We got to make some progress.
Lastly, I want to get your thoughts on the job numbers. Just came out last week, 311,000 new jobs. But on the negative side, 4,000 factory jobs were lost. Is that a hiccup? Is that a correction? What should we take from that?
Yeah, so Rick, we've seen a little bit of fading over the last couple of months in manufacturing jobs where it's kind of been dialed down, and I think more than anything else, it is a direct product of the Federal Reserve's interest rate policies, and I think in many ways they hit manufacturing hard. They hit it hard directly because higher interest rates mean the dollar is worth more, means it's harder to export. That impacts manufacturing. Imports coming in are cheaper. That impacts the competitiveness of domestic manufacturing. And then secondarily, the interest rates are also screwing around with the housing market and what have you, which is a large market for manufacturing.
Yeah.
And so they're getting hit a couple of different ways here. And I think that Powell and look, I think it's possible to land this plane. But I don't think that they can raise rates, and I think they got to start heading the opposite direction pretty soon.
They got to stop slamming on the brakes with both feet.
That's right. You got it.
And we've been saying this for a while. Look, I mean, you look at what's going on with these banks. Bad management, lax regulations, and of course, the Fed slamming on the brakes with both feet, causing chaos there. Nothing good going to come of this. But Scott, I appreciate the time as always. Great stuff.
You bet. Great to be with you tonight, Rick. Thank you.
Thanks so much, our good friend Scott Paul. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around to listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day that participants in the famed Bread and Roses strike gathered in Lawrence, Massachusetts to celebrate their victory. The strike had begun in January and was a hard-fought battle. More than 20,000 textile workers, most of them women, speaking more than 20 languages, participated in the action. It was a powerful stand of workers' solidarity across ethnic lines. On March 12th, the American Woolen Company agreed to most of the strikers' demands. In the days that followed, other companies also agreed to terms. The workers gained between 5 and 25% raises depending on their jobs. They also gained overtime pay. The ripples of this impact flowed throughout New England. It's estimated that 150,000 textile workers saw raises in the aftermath of the historic work action. At the gathering to commemorate the strike, leader of the industrial workers of the world, Big Bill Haywood, addressed the crowd saying, "You are the heart and soul of the working class. You, the strikers of Lawrence, have won the most signal victory of any organized body of working men in the world. You have demonstrated that there is a common interest in the working class that can bring all its members together." Despite the significance of this strike, the story is not taught in many of our schools. In 2011, the Zinn Education Project found that only 2 of the 10 major U.S. history textbooks discussed the strike. Today, let's take a minute to remember those brave women who declared, "Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too." For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
You gotta love today's Republican Daily Outrage, because there's one every day, right? There's a Republican Daily Outrage every day, because you got to keep feeding the faithful with the Daily Outrage candy to keep them all upset, so they don't realize how bad we're getting screwed over on virtually every front. But today's outrage brought to you by the Republican Party. They actually tweeted out today in the Daily Outrage, first it was gas cars, then gas stoves. Now Democrats are going after washing machines. That's right. They said washing machines are next. The left wants to make us lock down at home, eat bugs, and wash our clothes in the river, all in the name of climate. Really? And I'm going, okay, well, where's... And again, there's no documentation. There's no, hey, this is what they're doing. So I'm searching around on the inner tubes, and I'm trying to find, okay, who said something stupid about washing machines? Because I'm assuming it's going to be something coming out of California or Arizona or, one of the southwestern states that, is going, maybe we should be looking at conserving water in one sense or another. Maybe we should be having washing machines that use a limited amount of water, like the one I paid, the one we have. It's a limited water washing machine. Washes clothes fine. It's not like the old tubs that filled up a gazillion gallons of water. Maybe we should be moving towards that because, water is going to be a commodity we're going to be fighting wars over at some point. I was looking for that. I didn't even find that. But it was just one of those things. We got to throw some outrage. Got to get the outrage candy out there. Yeah. Also, if you do need something to get really outraged about, South Carolina, they've introduced a new piece of legislation in the state house there that any woman who gets an abortion in South Carolina, death penalty. Yep. Death penalty. Now, interestingly enough, you've got a number of states that are saying, hey, why is Walgreens pulling contraception off the shelves? In fact, you had a couple of senators who sent a letter to Albertsons, the big chain, grocery chains, to Costco, to Kroger, and to Walmart, asking them where they stand on this what they're calling the abortion pill, because Walgreens has said that they're not going to sell it in certain states, red states. And there's a part of me that goes, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with Walgreens saying, sorry, ladies, nothing for you. Because here's the dirty little secret. And my wife, arm's reach away from me, will testify to this. She spends way more money than I do. Way more. In fact, she spends the majority of the money in our household because she does all the grocery shopping, all the clothing shopping for kids, all of the shopping for everything. That's her gig. She likes it. She does it. She spends it. Do you know where she's not going to go? By choice? I mean, again, if you believe in the free market, this is a power of women to go, you know what? Sorry, Walgreens. We're not going to ever, for anything. This is how you deal with these folks. Because understand, contraception is something that's popular. More than 60% of the country goes, yeah, something we should have. It's a handful of crazy people on the extreme right who are pushing for this kind of stuff. Maybe here's a thought. Maybe you punish them financially. Stop going to Walgreens, not just in the states where they ban it, but all of the states. So my blue state sisters go, you know what? You're screwing over my red state sisters? I'm not going to Walgreens either. Here's a start.
This would completely encircle the community in oil and gas.
Biden administration approves controversial oil project in Alaska, but also prohibits other drilling in Alaska and U.S. Arctic waters. Plus,
one of the strongest storms ever recorded in the Southern Hemisphere may also have broken the record for the longest-lasting tropical cyclone.
In the Indian Ocean, Tropical Storm Freddie breaks a scary new record.
All of those scary records and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We're producing no new gas-fired plants in Texas, for example. Texas is about to be 50% wind and solar.
Wow, sounds terrible, Texas Congressman Chip Roy. You're welcome. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, a lot of folks are very angry today at the Biden administration for what's going on in Alaska. A lot of other people are just delighted by it.
Yeah, it depends on your perspective.
Doesn't it, though?
The Biden administration on Monday approved ConocoPhillips' controversial Willow oil drilling project in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska's North Slope. The Interior Department approved a scaled-down version of the ConocoPhillips proposal with 3 of the 5 sites Conoco requested, and the company will relinquish all remaining drilling rights in the reserve. Alaska's bipartisan congressional delegation, state leaders, and some Alaskan tribes praised the project for its projected jobs and revenue. Other Alaskan tribes and environmental and climate advocates condemned it as a climate bomb, potentially producing 600 million barrels of crude over the next 30 years at a time when scientists warn we must drastically reduce fossil fuel use.
On the other hand, what he's saying here is, okay, you can have these last 3 drilling platforms, but that is it?
Basically, however, on Democracy Now!, Indigenous climate advocate Sikanik Mopan rejected proponents' economic arguments.
Systematically, we've seen that small rural places like this, time and time again, have been in an economic hostage situation where they're told that the only way that they can get basic necessities like running water and plumbing and such is to sacrifice their health, their lands, their food security, and so many more consequences from this project.
Environmental groups are likely to sue to halt the project. The Biden administration, however, also announced sweeping new protections for 13 million additional acres in Alaska's National Petroleum Reserve and placed all U.S. Arctic Ocean waters off limits to future oil and gas exploration, which means ConocoPhillips' Willow project might be the last ever within the reserve. Environmental groups welcomed the new conservation action, but the Wilderness Society called it, quote, not nearly sufficient to blunt the impact of the Willow project. The 2 moves are seen as Biden attempting to strike a political balance between shifting away from fossil fuels and combating climate change in the long term with short-term pressures to increase domestic production amid global energy disruptions caused by Russia's war in Ukraine.
And, of course, to take away an election issue that could be used against him. But you know what? They're going to use it anyway.
Yep. And in related news, also in Alaska, the famous annual Iditarod sled dog race is underway. And like in previous years, organizers are increasingly grappling with the lack of snow and ice, creating dangerous conditions as Alaska's snows disappear and its permafrost melts.
Well, then, by all means, let's drill more oil there.
Off the coast of Africa, in the Indian Ocean, unusually warm ocean temperatures have made Tropical Storm Freddie one of the strongest cyclones ever recorded in the southern hemisphere, and it also set a new record for the longest-lived tropical cyclone in recorded history, going at more than 35 days and counting.
Wow.
Last month, Freddie killed dozens in both Madagascar and Mozambique, and over the weekend circled back to hit Mozambique again. In other news, in the banking sector, the Biden administration is taking steps to prevent wider fallout from the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, which, it turns out, also financed a sizable chunk of climate technology startups and renewable energy projects in the U.S. Finally, a sign of the times, Mack Truck, the manufacturer of big construction vehicles, has announced the first all-electric medium-duty vehicle with a maximum range of 240 miles on a single charge that reaches a full charge in less than 3 hours. While it's the first EV medium-duty truck, it's actually Mack Truck's second electric vehicle offering after the debut of its all-electric garbage truck last year.
Well, I'm telling you, anyone who hasn't noticed yet, we have hit the inflection point when it comes to electric vehicles in this country.
It certainly seemed like it.
Yeah, and it's all downhill from here for the internal combustion engine, says me. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So today in North Carolina, a big rally in Raleigh. Say that twice. Big rally in Raleigh, North Carolina, on the Supreme Court oral argument on this Harper versus, or it's Moore versus Harper voting rights case, which really could be horribly destructive for voting rights in this country, and one of the bigger cases of voting rights that probably in my lifetime. This is a big one, and here to share some thoughts on what happened today and walk us through what this case is about, share some ideas on maybe where this is going to go and how bad this Supreme Court, our six dictators in robes may decide. I've asked Gino Nuzillo to come talk with us. Gino is the campaign manager for Common Cause North Carolina. The website you want to check out is moreharper.org. Gino, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much for having me here, Rick. I'm grateful to be here.
So tell me about the event today in Raleigh. What'd you guys do today?
Yeah, so we are, of course, dealing with the ever-creeping rise of authoritarianism in our state from those who purport to serve us at the courts and in the legislature. And given what the court has done today, which I'd be happy to get to in the moment, which was to basically decide to rehear a legal case that may give legislators full reign to draw voting maps as they see fit, in addition to attacks in the form of voter ID, attacks on education funding, whole host of issues in North Carolina. There's no shortage of them. We decided it was time for that fourth branch of government, the people, to show up and build up a little bit more muscle than we had in the past few years, and actually be there in front of the court today, making our opposition to what the courts and the legislature was doing well known. So we brought together partners from all across North Carolina, from dirt roads, downtowns, and everywhere in between, to be there and to be real loud. And Rick, I'm pleased to say that from the news reports today, as they were gaveling into the court, the only thing they could hear were the people outside, and that is a true fact. You can find that in the reporting from today. So that's what we were gathered there for, to protest these cases, basically.
So get me straight on this, because there's this Harper versus Hall case. Yes. That's going to be heard before the state Supreme Court in North Carolina, and this is part of the Moore versus Harper case that's going to be heard at the U.S. Supreme Court. Am I getting this right?
You're getting there. So let me break it down real quick and bear with me through kind of the legal minutia. So in North Carolina, like in other states, we got to redraw these voting lines every 10 years. But if you live in North Carolina, it's about every 2 seconds because we can't ever get it right.
Right.
And so the last time this happened in 2021, they drew gerrymanders in our state that would have given Republicans, they were more gerrymandered than 99.9% of any other map that they could have possibly drawn. That's what the court said. So we sued, we went through the whole process, and last February 2022, we won at our state Supreme Court level. We got an unequivocal victory. First time partisan gerrymander was determined unconstitutional. Now, that's when it kind of split into two branches legally. One branch was an attempt by the legislature in what became known as Moore v. Harper. This attempt to use the independent state legislature theory to basically say that no one should be able to tell the legislature what they can or cannot do when it comes to voting rights. So that argument went up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right, they're trying to usurp the state Supreme Court by it's an end around.
That's right, and that became known as Moore v. Harper. Now, at the state level, that Harper v. Hall case, the origin, it continued, and it was addressing a few other legal matters. And basically, what's important to know is that by December 2022, that same state Supreme Court basically decided everything else. It reaffirmed that partisan gerrymandering was wrong, settled everything. Now, what happened in November? Our state Supreme Court flipped, and it flipped to a Republican majority. Given that, the state legislature here basically did the same thing that they're trying to do in Moore v. Harper, and they went to the state Supreme Court, now under new control, and said, hey, remember when you threw out our maps last year? Well, maybe y'all should try that again.
Like, so they want a second bite of the apple.
Right, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Don't you think you should try that again? And the court did, which is completely unprecedented. This has happened barely ever in the history of the state Supreme Court. Said, sure, nothing's changed in the law, nothing's changed in the facts. The only thing that's changed is the partisan control of the court. And they decided, okay, we'll do it over. And so now they are essentially, the court is essentially doing the Moore v. Harper work for them. And what I mean by that is they are going to say to state legislators, likely in this case, hey, we should have never gotten involved in this in the first place. Go back, draw the maps that you want, have at it. And so now that's what's happening at the state level at the same time as the legislators are trying to do it at the Supreme Court level. So it's basically win-win for them. They're trying to get the same place.
But I'm confused. How can they go to the U.S. Supreme Court and say that the state Supreme Court has no standing and they shouldn't be deciding this, that the big court should be doing this, while simultaneously saying no, the state Supreme Court should be doing this? How do you justify arguing both? Am I missing something?
You are not missing anything. Like, being confused about it is exactly how we feel, because it doesn't make any sense, because it is going beyond any legal precedent. It is essentially, it's power for power's sake. It's, if the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't give us exactly what we want in this, then the state Supreme Court will. And we are just using whatever levers because the courts are in lockstep with the legislature on this point. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's the reality that we are in now. And that's what they've asked both Supreme Courts to do. And what the state Supreme Court is basically saying, Rick, is, regardless of what happens at the U.S. Supreme Court level, maybe, God willing, the decision isn't as bad as we fear that it may be. Then the state Supreme Court's saying, okay, well, we'll still say, state legislators, you have free reign to gerrymander these maps. And that's the craziness of it. That's exactly what's going on. You're exactly right.
I mean, this is a heads I win, tails you lose scenario.
That's exactly right.
So if they win at the state level, do they end up pulling the U.S. Supreme? I'm confused. I'm really confused. But at the end of this, what's really, I guess, really important here is at the end of the line, they're still trying to rig the game. And right. that famous line of legislators, politicians picking their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. This is front and center. And is this private money? Is this state money? Are taxpayers footing the bill for both of this? I got a lot of questions.
Yes. So let me answer your first one, which is how it might affect the U.S. Supreme Court case. We don't know yet. So the latest news what we have is that the U.S. Supreme Court's asked the parties to give them more information about what it might mean, but there's a range of outcomes. The U.S. Supreme Court could continue to say, this is an important question. We're going to settle it no matter what happens in North Carolina. They could kick the can down the road. The unsatisfied answer is we don't quite know yet how it'll affect it. Now, when it comes to who's behind this, I mean, taxpayers are footing a lot of the bill. And I wish that I knew, just like kind of in the gerrymandering of the past decade, when you had Tom Hoffeller, who was drawing these maps behind closed doors, and he was funded by some secret entity, and no one in the public got to know what was happening when drawing those maps. It would not be a surprise to us to know that there is that kind of machination behind the scene. We don't have that information publicly. We know that when they were doing the redistricting process last time, that they had secret maps that they didn't disclose to the public. And that bit of information, Rick, leads me to believe that there's probably more to that story as well, as of course there would be. And so that's what's kind of happening with our legislators there at the court. But it is a lot of taxpayer-funded expense to bring both cases in both courts.
And what's concerning to me is, I look at this as an outsider and I go, North Carolina, you get your what together. To have law that is swinging, depending on the day, the temperature, whether the sun's up or down. That's not that instability is not. I don't think that's a great situation.
That's right.
And the fact that we can rig our system to benefit whoever's holding the pencil or the mouse, if you will. Again, not quite sure that's the greatest system, or am I missing something?
No, that's exactly right. And if you were there at that rally today, you would have heard the exact same thing. Because how can you have any faith in a system that is not consistent, that is not fair in its application, that is not equal? And that you can have a system where lawmakers get to stay in power no matter what, without accountability, don't have to give a damn about you. And if you had been there at that rally today, Rick, I wish you would have heard speaker after speaker talking about how school funding is on the line, that this court and these legislators are trying to take $1.7 billion from our kids' schools in North Carolina, that access to good wages, the ability to form a union is on the line in a place like North Carolina, which is one of the most anti-union states in the country. You would have heard this step by step over and over. You would have heard about how they're trying right now in our state budget to put in this provision known as the Taxpayer Protection Act, which would essentially starve the state government in the next decade of all the things that we need to fund.
Yeah.
And all of that depends on actually having a fair, a responsive system in the courts and the legislature. What we have instead is a rubber stamp court in lockstep with an extreme and authoritarian legislature. And that is, it's scary for myself and for a lot of people who live in this state.
And what this all looks like to me, again, is, I have conversations with my Republican friends all the time, and I'm going, is there one, can we agree on that we want people to be able to have access to the ballot box, that without being able to exercise our right to the franchise, this whole experiment of self-governance, this whole experiment of self-rule just is a farce. Because I look at what this case could pave, what we see in other states, voter purges and, ending, vote by mail, you name the roadblock, the obstruction to keep people from being able to vote. And you're really not talking about rule of we the people. You're talking about a rule of, people who could, who are lucky enough to get through the obstacle course, or the ones who are chosen.
That's right. And Rick, you raise a good point, because over the last year and a half, we've traveled to around 60 counties or so in North Carolina. And Common Cause is, of course, a nonpartisan organization. We side with no one but the people. And there is a clear difference between those who have the party affiliations in the state capitol and people who may have political leanings, Republican or Democrat, in North Carolina's counties, who, when you tell them, when you just talk to people about what is happening, the sheer unfairness of it, everyone is against it. It's not rocket science to say this is an unfair system that's not responsive to you. This does not work for any of us. And in so many North Carolina counties, especially in counties like in our northeastern part of the state, where jobs are leaving and kids are leaving for better opportunities, and there is a strong desire for investment and saving those places, people work together. It is not about Republican and Democrat in those places. It's about what can we do to keep our communities places people want to stay.
Yeah.
And when they see what's happening in Raleigh and they see the unfairness of it, people come together across those lines. I think it is more partisan and it is more polarized in the state capitol than it is on the ground. And the reason it's not more like that in Raleigh is, again, because the system is set up to keep those folks in power no matter what. But I think you're right. Everyday people see it for what it is once you talk to them about it.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show with Gino Nuzalillo. Gino is the campaign manager with Common Cause North Carolina. You want to check out the website, moreharper.org. You'll get some more information on what we're talking about and maybe a way to get involved. What can people outside of North Carolina do? Because, look, what happens in North Carolina will have repercussions all across this country. We get a gerrymandered state that gives, over representation to one party or the other. And look, I don't want Democrats to over gerrymander another state. I want the will of the people to be, on display in our halls of power.
That's right.
What can people do?
It's the $1 million question, and it is exactly something we are trying to figure out here in North Carolina. So, I mean, the first thing is, if you're listening to this show and you're listening to Rick Smith, I think you're already on a good path, good start. Talking to people about this case and the threats, kind of setting the stage for what the threats are that we're seeing both in DC and our state capitals, is an important first step. Once people know better, they act better, right? Once I know kind of what is happening in my state, it's almost impossible for me not to act. So that education and awareness piece, talking to our friends, our neighbors, and having conversations that maybe we're a little bit scared of politically, is still worth the effort. I think the other thing that we're learning in North Carolina, Rick, is it's time for us to get active again. You know, when we came together today in Raleigh, it was really the first time we'd had kind of one of those big gatherings and a direct action. Because what we did, Rick, is we took invitations to a follow-up town hall that we're going to have in Raleigh, and we marched, hundreds of us, straight into our legislative building. We went to the Speaker of the House. We went to the Senate leader who are behind all this, and we went right to their offices and dropped off hundreds of invitations and said, 2 weeks, we're going to have a town hall. We better hope you are there to answer for what you're doing and to listen to the people. Now, will they show up? Who knows? They probably won't. But doing that kind of action, doing that kind of attention building, and building some of the outrage against lawmakers, that kind of direct action, we need to be organized and we need to be pursuing activities like that. So I think the organizations you're working with in your state who are doing it and using strategies and tactics like that, that's what we need. We got to put these lawmakers on their heels because we don't really have much time for much else. So I think that's the big thing that comes to mind.
So last question I've got for you. Does there need to be a federal oversight of how we draw these maps? Because this is going on in states all across this country. My state of Pennsylvania, when the Republicans had the pencil, they were drawing some very creative maps here as well until our state Supreme Court stepped in. Just like North Carolina, look at a number of these states. Is this one of those things where there's got to be a common rule, that there's a baseline that's not in their hands and that's predictable across the country, that we go, you know what, this is how it's done?
Unequivocally, yes, Rick. There is a bill that is probably not going to make it out of the U.S. House of Representatives in this cycle, but it's the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and it's a collection of principles that can restore access to the ballot box and full voting rights for us, and includes in it basic standards to prevent partisan gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering in this country. The fact of the matter is, by 2031, we're going to be drawing these maps again. And we are either going to face a decade where we actually have responsive representation that gives a damn about us, or another decade of these maps that lock in power over people. And so by the time we get to 2031, we have to pass the John Lewis Act. We have to have those basic standards. And that means that we're going to have to fight really hard when it comes to who we send to Congress, who we send to the presidency, and make sure that we've got pro-democracy champions there.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Gino, I appreciate the time. Keep up the great work, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us as more information comes out on this. Again, this is screwy, but, look, am I shocked? Not even a little bit.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Thanks so much, Gino. Gino Nuzalillo. He is the campaign manager there with Common Cause North Carolina. Make sure you check out the website, moreharper.org. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at the work that they do on this issue. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Let's go.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
You know, something has to be done on the voting front. It's just, I mean, stop and think about this thing in North Carolina for a second. Now, remember, you know, Republicans, you know, John Roberts told us before he became Chief Justice that he believed in stare decisis, decided law, and that he was only going to call balls and strike. And then they've gone on and they've overturned, you know, laws that have been on the books for decades. In North Carolina, their Supreme Court flipped and overturned, you know, something that was in law for a couple months. And this is something that should be of concern to every person in this country, that we're no longer deciding law based on law anymore. It's now based on ideology. That there are no consistents. There's no consistency here. There's no baseline anymore. And it's all about who's controlling what and what power they can gain from it. That's troubling. And which hat you're on, which team you're on, deciding which direction that the law is going to swing. Voting should be open to everyone. Sorry, there shouldn't be all these barriers. Should we know who people are? Yes, you should. We're registering. We register people all the time. Now, I've got friends that, well, we shouldn't have to register. We don't have to register guns. And there's an argument to be made there. But we do register people. And I'm not 100% opposed to the idea of a voter identification. My problem begins on the voter ID when you start talking about limiting what can be used. Because then we start targeting certain groups based on who has the power to limit certain groups of people because of how they may vote. And it's on both sides of the aisle. I'm not saying it's predominantly one side, but both sides do this. That's what the voter ID law was for. It was to keep poor people from the voting polls, especially poor black people. We had a Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai, who was very clear. They passed voter ID in this state so that Romney could win the state of Pennsylvania. He didn't, but that was the intent. And interestingly enough, the only people that we seem to be catching who are committing voter fraud, you know, double voting as someone who they're not, seem to be Republicans. It's very strange. But there's got to be some oversight. And when the Shelby decision was made, that just threw the doors to the Wild West open on voting rights. And we've seen all kinds of shenanigans. There has got to be some parameters, especially with these maps. I look at Ohio, they still don't have maps yet. Because their legislature said, no, we're not going to abide by it. We're not going to follow the rule of a Supreme Court that gives us the advantage by an enormous amount. We want more because that power is never enough. And this is why you have to have someone who oversees this. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of this North Carolina case, because it's weird to me that they're saying, no, the state Supreme Court shouldn't decide this case. We're going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, while simultaneously arguing that the state Supreme Court should have the power. It's really twisted. But again, you know, you're going to go where you can go and get what you can get. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Is it twisted to you? Or is it predictable? Is this what they do? Rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2 on On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day that participants in the famed Bread and Roses strike gathered in Lawrence, Massachusetts to celebrate their victory. The strike had begun in January and was a hard-fought battle. More than 20,000 textile workers, most of them women, speaking more than 20 languages, participated in the action. It was a powerful stand of workers' solidarity across ethnic lines. On March 12th, the American Woolen Company agreed to most of the strikers' demands. In the days that followed, other companies also agreed to terms. The workers gained between 5 and 25% raises depending on their jobs. They also gained overtime pay. The ripples of this impact flowed throughout New England. It's estimated that 150,000 textile workers saw raises in the aftermath of the historic work action. At the gathering to commemorate the strike, leader of the industrial workers of the world, Big Bill Haywood, addressed the crowd saying, "You are the heart and soul of the working class. You, the strikers of Lawrence, have won the most signal victory of any organized body of working men in the world. You have demonstrated that there is a common interest in the working class that can bring all its members together." Despite the significance of this strike, the story is not taught in many of our schools. In 2011, the Zinn Education Project found that only 2 of the 10 major U.S. history textbooks discussed the strike. Today, let's take a minute to remember those brave women who declared, "Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too." For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Profiteering is always bad, but there are degrees of profiteers. Level 1 includes your everyday price gougers like banks and airlines. At level 2, you'll find the more demonic outfits like loan sharks and for-profit college hucksters. Then, top of the heap at level 3, you'll find Eli Lilly. This $288 billion drug-making colossus is America's primary peddler of insulin, the diabetes drug that some 7 million Americans must constantly take, literally to stay alive. But having both monopoly power over the market and such a huge base of captive customers, Lilly has gleefully jacked up its prices again and again over 3 decades, with it now costing each sufferer as much as $1,000 a month. Finally, under intense political pressure to stop its extreme life-threatening gouging, the giant recently announced it would cut its insulin prices by a whopping 70%. In full-page ads, Lilly hailed its corporate generosity, magnanimously declaring that, quote, everyone deserves affordable options. But, hello, it has intentionally charged unaffordable rip-off prices for 30 years, wallowing in monopoly profits. And hello again, if Lilly says it can keep profiteering on its insulin product despite slashing the price by 70%, that means it has been overcharging patients by 70% all this time. Yet its rich executives want us to thank them? No, thank you. Even with a price cut, they're still charging $66 for a single vial of insulin. Guess what? It costs Lilly less than $7 to produce that vial, and it could be sold profitably for under $9. Meanwhile, Lilly's price cut is voluntary, meaning it can raise the price again at any time. And CEO David Ricks has refused to pledge that he'll keep the medicine affordable.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it's being reported that the Justice Department and the Securities and Exchange Commission are now looking into the collapse of this Silicon Valley Bank. And as I said yesterday, every one of those executives who lined their pocket with those bonuses literally hours before, maybe we should be going after them. And all of those people who sat on the boards, who, you know, like Barney Frank, who said, no, keep doing what you're doing. Maybe we should start going after them as well. I know that's too much. Yeah, but it's still, every time these banks get themselves into trouble, who do they come looking for? You and me. anyway, here to share some thoughts on what's going on and what happened and maybe where we go from here. I've asked Pedro DaCosta to come talk with us. Pedro is my go-to guy, anything Federal Reserve, anything banking. He is also the host of Fed Speak podcast, also the head of policy for the Americas at MNI Market News. Pedro, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure, Rick. Thanks for having me.
So, look, I'm not going to hide the fact that, again, another bank goes under. Another bank says, "Hey, come bail us out." Especially at a time when you've got the students getting screwed over with massive debt, and you've got a Republican Party going, "No, we can't help you, but bankers and vulture capitalists, we can certainly come to their rescue." Do you see the anger?
Absolutely. I mean, if there was something more unsavory than bailing out kind of buttoned up Wall Street bankers, it turns out it's bailing out a bunch of unbuttoned shirt tech bros, right? It has that feeling of like you're bailing out the wealthy, right? So I think it's terrible for kind of public morale. Even if it is probably, even if the some of the kind of ring fencing bailout steps that were taken by the authorities are probably necessary in order to prevent something worse from happening. And that is kind of the too big to fail game. Even though this bank was not supposedly too big to fail, it was assessed to be systemic for the time being. And so, the authorities decided to step in. But as you say, you can understand the public anger that's probably going to surround this episode.
Yeah. Now you're the expert here. How did we get here? How did this happen? I mean, just in layman's terms, for a truck driver to understand, how did we get into this mess?
Sure. Well, I think everybody's still trying to sort that out because it's barely been a week. I mean, the amazing part is that we went from, the Fed Chair Jerome Powell laying out a strong economy and a sound financial system in testimony on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then by Friday, we had a major financial incident. So, what the heck happened, right? There were several things. I think one major issue is that the bank appears to have been mismanaged, right? They put on bets that were kind of fairly easy to spot as, ones that would be losing money, and yet they kept them on for longer than it was advisable. I think second, there was a regulatory failure. Clearly there was a need for greater oversight that was not had, and there were a bunch of red flags that former regulators that I talked to say should have alerted the current supervisors and somehow did not. And then there's just the general interest rate shock. Like banks failing, are a normal thing, but not all banks should function. That's part of, the capitalist system is that, firms should fail. The issue is, how do you allow a bank to fail without it cascading into other areas in ways that like single firm failures in other sectors do not take place. And so, yeah, this happened. But the interest rate shock, I think, is really important to keep in mind. We went from an environment where not only you didn't just go from 0 interest rates to 5% interest rates and more, but you had a 10, 20-year period of 0 interest rates, in which made, financial firms really complacent and accustomed to those low borrowing costs, not just financial firms in general.
Right.
And now that these costs are skyrocketing, a lot of people are going to get caught off guard. So this is unlikely to be a singular event. And of course it wasn't just SVB. There was Signature Bank, there was Silvergate last week. So I imagine that this is not the end of the road here for this particular crisis.
And maybe this is where having a risk assessment manager would have probably been helpful, because I guess one of the banks didn't have one of those for most of last year. Where maybe, gaming this out and maybe having regulators who are testing and stress testing these banks. I don't know, maybe a good thing, maybe not.
Again, another red flag. And then there's the issue of the regulations that were altered in 2018 and removed some of the protections that might have otherwise been there. Some people are pointing their finger at that particular event. And so, yeah, plenty of blame to go around, really. A lot of people had to be asleep at the switch in order for this to take place. But you take kind of regulatory complacency, managerial complacency, and then you add on top of it this interest rate shock, and that was the perfect recipe for this kind of disaster.
How much credit for this does Peter Thiel and the vulture capitalists get for what they did on Thursday by pulling their money out? Or were they just smart? They just go, hey, we saw this happen, we saw them going down, and we just protected ourselves.
That's really hard to know. I think that's going to be part of the postmortem. People are going to try to figure that out, right? Like who knew what when, and to your point about executive withdrawals, and did they contribute to the run by doing that? And so I think there's going to be a lot of kind of forensic analysis of what actually took place and who knew what when.
Yeah, because here's the thing, in this modern
that was a very
era,
specific run, as you suggest. Like it was very specific. But then again, did he cause it, or did he just see the writing on the wall and jump out at the right time? It's hard for me to be in a position to know.
Yeah, because I had a listener email me and go, you do realize that Peter Thiel's a big Trump guy. Trump was deplatformed or debanked by this bank. There's some bad blood. There's a whole conspiracy that goes around on this, so you know. And that how the conspiracy goes is, Peter Thiel pulled all his money out, and then the call went out. They're in trouble. And it just, again, it sent the message. And in this digital age, everyone got on their phone and start withdrawing money. And I don't know that any bank can withstand the kind of massive, everybody pulling their money out all at once kind of run.
That's exactly right. I think there's no amount of capital levels that prevent a full-fledged bank run in the way that this one took place, especially not a digital one, which, as you say, it is kind of different because 2008 was the semi-digital age, but not quite the same, right? And so it was kind of a more slow-moving picture. $42 billion in withdrawals in overnight is just, I'm still trying to get my head around that figure, because you certainly couldn't do that standing in line trying to get cash, right? Exactly. It would be a very difficult logistical thing to accomplish. And somehow they pulled the money out. And so, yeah, it's stunning.
Yeah, I mean, at some point there's going to have to be some capital borders, and I've been saying we need capital borders for a very long time. But this kind of now hot money, you got to wonder what the future is going to look like. But again, I come back to this moment of the Biden administration had to do something. I had a lot of listeners going, screw them, let them fail. And I got to tell you, my inclination is, hey, screw these rich people. They knew not to put money into a bank account with more than 250 grand into it. The rules are what the rules are. How you got 250 grand in a bank account, Pedro?
Certainly not.
And nobody I know does.
Exactly.
So if you're way above that, you knew the risks. Screw you should be the mentality. But then again, here's the thing, as has been pointed out to me by calmer people, those folks employ people, those are payrolls, those are a whole bunch of other things. So I think that has to be explained a lot better than we've done.
It does, and it's very difficult. And as you say, it's unsavory and kind of grimy. It feels wrong, right? It feels like you're bailing out the wrong people, and you probably are, but almost by definition you are. But in the process, you're also saving a lot of good people. But it's not even just the singular event that you've just, let's say, like I was talking to somebody today who was talking about the effect on the wine industry. We think about tech, but turns out a lot of the wine industry banked with SVB as well as a local bank, right? And so imagine like your average working class, wine industry worker, not particularly wealthy, like not getting paid on Monday because of this whole debacle. That's sort of the individual level where you can think of for this example. But then it's really the cascading effect that it would have on a rush to the exits in other areas, and like the sort of loss of confidence in the entire banking system that might have ensued if the run kept going. So the idea was to ring fence the run. The immediate response in terms of the stock market fall yesterday was certainly not good. If you watch bank stocks, they continued to tank. Today they got some relief, but there's still doubts about how much take up this new Fed lending facility is going to have that allows banks to unwind some of their treasury market positions that they might have gotten into. And so, it remains to be seen how contained this thing is. But in my experience covering the last crisis, when you hear the word contained, it's already bad news. It means it's not, right? It means that the fear has already spread. And you do see the global headlines. I mean, every country in the world is assessing what kinds of exposure to our regional banks their banks might have. And so, the banking system is deeply interconnected, and clearly no amount of regulation, or at least not the current range of regulations that we have, certainly don't appear sufficient to prevent this kind of thing.
But wouldn't have, the original Dodd-Frank at least had done something better than this? I mean, again, it's amazing to me how, bipartisanship always benefits the very well-to-do, and the working class takes it on the chin. And, as I said yesterday, it's amazing now people are finding out that, hey, but, banks need brakes too, just like trains, and regulators. Who knew?
It's a weird kind of game that regulators are playing, because they don't want to favor, in a way, the loosening of regulations that in 2018 that allowed this to take place was actually, there was a heavy lobbying by the community banks and by these regional banks, arguing that they should not be treated like the banks that caused the global financial crisis and were sort of involved in it. And they made and had a case that they should not be treated the same, and that by being treated the same, they were bearing costs that they couldn't proportionately bear. And so at the time, you could have seen it as a way to prevent, the big guys from getting too big. But now this debacle actually shows you that you're not preventing that at all. These same deposits that are exiting SVB are going to the major banks now that people are scared of some of the smaller names. And so,
and that's what I was going to ask you, how much of this is going to lead to more consolidation, and can we stop, eventually having, 3 banks?
Well, the reporting, it suggests that it's already, the consolidation is already happening. And, I don't know. I don't know how we have a lot of banks. We don't, even though it appears that we have very few, we have a ton of banks in this country, a ton of banking options, but I don't think we can prevent this crisis from leading to greater concentration. But I also don't think that the major banks are totally immune from what will likely be the fallout of this crisis, right?
No,
because they're also exposed to this interest rate shock. They also have unrealized treasury losses. It's just that they haven't had to actually realize those losses in the same way that that SVB was forced to, because they weren't facing a bank run.
So let me ask you that. How much of this has to do with the Fed raising the rates? Because again, I've got a lot of my listeners going, this is all the fault of the Feds. Don't blame the board and the executives. They couldn't stop the Fed. How much of this is borne by the Fed's interest hikes? And then ultimately, because the Fed's interest hikes are obviously Biden's fault, because he gave $1,400 to every man, woman, and child on the planet, and that's caused the inflation. So it's all Biden's fault. So I'm curious.
Absolutely. It's a great question, but it really depends on your perspective, and it really depends on how far back you want to go, right? Because if you take it from a fairly short-term window, you could argue that the Fed raised interest rates too quickly and therefore caught some of these banks off guard. Actually, you could argue, let's say the Fed failed to catch the inflation problem when it was coming. So it took too long to raise interest rates. And when it did so, it had to raise them so quickly that it caught these particular banks off guard and caught other institutions off guard. You could make that argument.
Yeah. So are we going to be,
But if you go further back, you could argue that none of this purported ecosystem, that I hate that word when it's applied to firms, by the way, but none of this whole tech ecosystem that we're supposedly saving, this startup extinction event that we prevented, to use all these hyperbolic terms that the tech industry used over the weekend, none of these firms would have ever existed had it not been for the largesse of the Fed in keeping interest rates so low for so long in the first place. So it's kind of ironic to have a sector that would not actually exist if it weren't for the Fed, complaining that the Fed has now brought it to its knees. So it's kind of circular, if that makes any sense.
No, it fits perfectly. It's the same, I listen to my conservative friends tell me how much they hate government and government shouldn't do anything. And we don't want government around, then going, why didn't the government do anything? I mean, this is, again, another one of those moments where, it's the same thing with the train derailment. Where's the government? But you didn't want them. You didn't want them regulating anything. You didn't want them around. Now that's where you're putting the blame. I look at this Republican from Missouri, this Representative Lukemeyer. He's now saying that the government should temporarily insure every bank deposit in the country, because everyone's going to take their money out and run, he says. This is, This guy's a former banker. I'm just a
you
dumb
know
truck
what's
driver.
funny is that
Hold on. I'm just a dumb truck driver. I know we already do that.
Yeah, that's the thing. Well, the thing is, he's actually raising an important point, and there's a lot of Democrats that agree with him. Like, we don't effectively do that, but like the statement this weekend implied that if this happened to other banks, that all uninsured deposits might be covered. At the moment, they are not covered, which is why this crisis is actually not over. But then if we do cover all uninsured deposits currently, that means we would be insuring far more money than the FDIC has the funds to cover in case of failure. So we would run into a massive moral hazard problem of being able to cover, actually back this promise that we're making. And so I think one of the biggest questions coming out of this, temporary solution that the FDIC and the Fed and the Treasury have delivered is whether this sudden support for making whole these uninsured depositors, whether it would apply to other instances of a similar bank breakdown. And that's a huge question mark that nobody has the answer to right now.
So my question back to him would be very simple. So when my neighbor down the street loses his job and they're going to foreclose on his house, should we help them?
That's the thing, right? I mean, it's hard to claim that individuals and workers are systemic ever, even if they are en masse. And that was one of the big issues in the financial crisis, right? You could arguably have accomplished the same thing as the bank bailouts did by just bailing out the homeowners, right?
That's what I was saying.
So there is an irony there.
No, because this is my point, Pedro. I mean, the sad reality is we keep insuring these big companies and these big vulture capitalists who continually to do these things, and they never learn the lesson. As I started yesterday's show with, rich people doing rich people things, because I never see them out on the street corner with a tin cup and pencils. Never.
Absolutely not. And the irony is especially rich when it comes to venture capital, because they are especially kind of libertarian in their world outlook. They're like, get your government hands off my venture capital, and until the time comes for for something like this.
Last question I've got for you. How you follow this stuff much more than I do, or than our audience does. How bad is this going to get? Because I've got people kind of worrying that this Luke Meyer quote that everyone's going to go run to get their $16 out of the bank because they think there's nothing left. Is this the beginning of that? I mean, are we going to start seeing people on the ledge? Should we be worried?
I think we should be worried about something, unfortunately, something akin to 2008, where there's like rolling, bank issues that might get bigger and bigger, or, pockets of concern in money market funds or the treasury market, like kind of market dysfunction and market failures that require various kinds of intervention from the authorities, including the Fed. I don't think that we should be worried about deposits, because I think there's very deep understanding of like how to prevent bank runs in sort of the people who run these things, and they would never let it happen. And we have the funds to not allow that to happen. So I think people's deposits are completely safe. Their holdings of bank bonds might not be so safe if any of your viewers are holding on to the bonds and equities of banks. That's a different story. But I think deposits are safe. Now, are uninsured deposits all safe? That question I cannot answer yet until we get further clarity from the authorities.
And again, I keep going back to where I started with. You know what? You knew the risk. This is where we're told they get all the rewards because they take the risks. This is kind of I don't know. I'm struggling with that simple justice thing, but we'll see how this plays out. Pedro, as always, I appreciate the time, and I'd love to have you back as this continues and we find out more of how bad this is going to get.
Absolutely, Rick. The story will continue, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Good stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate the time. Our good friend Pedro DaCosta. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. On this day in labor history, the year was 1954, marking the opening of the powerful labor film Salt of the Earth. Salt of the Earth told the story of striking Chicano miner members of the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers, Local 890, against the Empire Zinc Mine in New Mexico. The three filmmakers had been blacklisted by Hollywood because they were accused of holding communist sympathies and because they refused to testify before the House Un-American Committee of Congress. The filmmakers had difficulty finding actors willing to star in their film. Undeterred, they enlisted a handful of actors and then cast members of Local 890 in the rest of the roles. They also met with community members to discuss the script. The result was a moving testament to the power of workers and community. The film depicts how the women of the community took up the role of picketers after the courts had barred the union men from demonstrations. But not everyone was pleased that this story was being told. Local media began railing against the film. Congressman Donald Jackson of California called the film a new weapon for Russia. Soon, protesters began to show up to disrupt the filming. Someone shot at one of the actors' cars. Fortunately, he was not in it at the time. After filming ended, the problems continued. Editing studios refused to touch the controversial film. Few movie houses would show it. The film did, however, find acclaim abroad, especially in Mexico and France. 2014 marked the film's 60th anniversary, and several special screenings took place from New Mexico to New York. This incredible worker's story is finally receiving the attention that it deserves. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Want to hear your thoughts on this because this financial situation, again, another one of these moments where the responses I'm getting from folks angry at the fact that, again, we've allowed these bankers to put the country at risk again. The quote unquote smart people, the people who know what to do with the money, the ones that we give all the tax breaks to, we give all the loopholes to, we do all this stuff because they're the smart people, and they always seem to figure out a way to put all of us at risk. And look, there's a moment where you go, big part of this is, we keep giving in. Bipartisanship at work here, deregulation at work here, an overzealous Fed at work here. Because the wealth class, they need the cheap labor. They are hell-bent on causing the next recession. They are hell-bent on causing more pain and misery because they know they're going to be fine. And this should be something that's uniting us around an idea of saying we demand better. Going to finish off on a sad note. It's being reported by the folks over at the Hill that President Biden has said that former President Jimmy Carter has asked him to deliver the eulogy at his funeral. Now he's not, as I guess Jimmy Carter's daughter said, he's still got time on him. But from the reports that we've heard, could be any time now that the former president passes. He's in hospice care, and that's never a good sign. And look, he's 98 years old, the longest living president in the history of the country. And look, a guy who I remember as a kid, one of my first real memories of a president. And again, there goes my childhood. But yeah, so just something to kind of remember and think about. Kind of sad about it. I'm really sad about it. Want to hear your thoughts. Email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts, from Stitcher to Podbean, iHeart, iTunes, all of those places. We're there. Yeah, it's just, now that's stuck in my head. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.